Okay, hi. Today I'm very, very humbly presenting Joshua Royal to Songpreacher's Podcast, and it's a great honor and pleasure to have you on the podcast, Joshua. And
Yeah, good to
definitely
be here.
looking forward to, thank you, looking forward to digging deep into your music career and what's brought you to where we are today. So I'll just jump into the first question: Is how did you get here? Music, how did you find Christ, and just walk us through that journey.
I grew up for the first 18 years of my life. I grew up in a town called Quincy, Illinois. Town of about 40,000 people in rural Illinois. But I grew up going to the same Pentecostal Foursquare church that entire stint. My parents are both Christians, and so that was a very foundational element to how I was raised. And they not only believed in you know raising their kids with Christian values, but committing to a church body, a local church family. They believed in the power that is contained in a church family that is committed to you and that you're committed to. And so that was something that was well established early on. But yeah, my parents kind of discovered a musical inclination with me pretty early on. They got me my first drum set when I was 2 years old for Christmas, and I could, kind of keep a beat, and that was good enough for them. And so kind of grew up just, listening to songs, playing along with the drums. The Lord has been very kind to me to, give me the ability to, just kind of play along by ear and feel things out. And so that's kind of where everything started there. And then my church gave me the opportunity to start playing on their main service worship team when I was in sixth grade, which it was a small church. So I mean, it's not like they had a ton of people to begin with, but still for I don't even know what I would have been at that time, a 11 or 12-year-old, to be entrusted with that type of responsibility of taking part in a team that's leading God's people in worship. That was a really high honor, I guess, for me. At least I thought so at that age. And so my love for worship music and worship in the church just kind of grew from there. Seeing the impact of, I always had a love for music, and I knew, and I had an awareness of how that affected people, but this new specific avenue of worship music and how God's people connect with Him through music was something so fascinating and powerful to me. And so I grew a love for that. And then throughout the course of my time just kind of serving on the worship team, I felt stronger and stronger, like, okay, this isn't something that I just want to do as a hobby. This is something I'd like to pursue more seriously, but I didn't know what that looked like because our church, you know, was in a situation where, right now, where I am now, it's like I serve as a full-time worship pastor in a church, and I'm very grateful to be able to do that. But the church I grew up in wasn't structured that way. It was a very small staff. The worship leader who was in charge of running everything kind of wore multiple hats like the other staff members. And so the concept of somebody who would be paid full time to lead the music, throughout the week was kind of foreign to me. But then I went to a summer camp the year after my freshman year of high school, and that was kind of a rough year for me. I kind of felt like, even though I'd grown up in the church, seventh grade was kind of the pinnacle moment for me of like, okay, I'm taking my faith seriously and I want to make it my own at this point. But ninth grade was kind of this weird year, got involved with some, not so great individuals. Thankfully didn't make any irreparable mistakes during that time, but definitely was not being the person that I knew I was called to be or that I wanted to be. But, as life goes, kids go through stages and it just kind of ebbs and flows. So anyway, I had kind of gone through a rough patch that entire year. My relationship with my parents was pretty rocky, and just feeling like super just icky about the last 9 months or whatever it had been. And then, so at this church camp, there was this worship band that came and led for us throughout the week. And then midway through the week, the singer, it's a guy named Andy Ray, he was given the opportunity to share his testimony for one of the breakout sessions or whatever. So I went to it. And I just remember feeling so inspired, but even beyond inspiration, it was more of like divine encounter as I'm hearing this guy talk, just sharing about his experience and like where he felt the Lord was calling him, and how, you know, now he's at a point where he's doing, you know, traveling worship ministry full time. And that was something that really stuck with me, and I wanted to know more about it. And so afterwards I pulled him aside. I'm a 13, 14-year-old kid at this point, like just trying to figure out life. And he spent 2 hours talking to me. Like, he had other things to do later that night to get ready for the service. But he took time like out of his busy schedule throughout that week to really invest in me and pour some time into me and just share his heart. And I remember walking away from that conversation really feeling like the Lord was giving me a verification or a green light. Like, hey, this is what I've designed you for. This is what I've called you to. Obviously not in the exact same manner, but this path is one that I've wired you for and that I want you to take. And so I was in a very rare position as a young, you know, going into sophomore in high school guy to already know what I was designed for and what I was made for. Because everyone else in, you know, not everyone, most people in my high school were still trying to figure out, you know, how do I get through this week, or what does college look like, or where am I going? What do I want to study? I don't know. And I'm very grateful that the Lord kind of gave me some insight really early on, hey, this is where I want you to go. And so from there, it just kind of became a searching, praying process of, okay, Lord, I have the calling, like, you've given this to me. I'm still 3 years out from graduating though. Like, what do I do with that? And so, you know, we looked into every different avenue for worship ministry, what it looks like to study that in college. We looked at Hillsong Australia at one point, and that just wasn't the Lord's plan. But the summer after my junior year, I started like doing some more serious college visits, I guess. And we visited 6 schools, and the first 5 were just very clear no's. Like, absolutely not. Nothing wrong with the school itself, but the program that was described to us and presented to us just wasn't at all where we felt like the Lord was, you know, leading me. And then we visited Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona, which I have family ties in Phoenix, so that was just kind of a natural, okay, like, let's see what this is. And like, you know, if I'm going to go far away, at least I'll have family or whatever. And same experience to start off with. Like, we're given the campus tour, and like some of the things were described for us, and it just didn't seem like a fit. And so we were walking away pretty discouraged. And then my mom, as we're walking off campus, and some backstory of my mom, she has, I think, just this supernatural connection with the Lord where she will get audible promptings from the Holy Spirit. Wow. That's something that was very just invested into me really early on. The idea, part of it was growing up in a Foursquare church, but also it was watching my family interact and operate with the Lord. And so that was something that was very real to me very early on. But anyway, she gets this audible prompting as we're about to leave campus, and the Lord just says, hey, go to the theology building. And we're like, okay, it's summertime. No one's going to be there, but let's go. And so we go. It's unlocked. There's no one at the front desk, but my mom keeps getting this prompting, like, keep looking around, keep going. And so we're just wandering back through these offices, and then we get to the office of the director of the worship arts program. And we were like, hey, you know, our son's a, you know, prospective student. He was looking at this program. Like, could we talk to you? And like, just impromptu, like, drops everything and says, yes, I'd love to chat. And so he pulls my entire family into the office, and just again, it was like this divine encounter. My dad, who has been one of the main spiritual giants in my life, had a very discerning spirit. And so that through all of our conversations, through the college visits, it's just like he was just getting the sense of this ain't it. But throughout that conversation, like his spirit was at peace. He felt like, we felt like all of our questions that we had, that we were pondering, we were getting answers to, and answers that felt right in our spirit. And so, I mean, unofficially, we kind of, committed to GCU that day. Like I walked off that campus being like, okay, this is where I will be a year from now. And so again, just another example of the Lord not really wasting any time with me and just saying, hey, here's where you're going. I'm not going to drag you through this. I mean, it was still a search process, but I'm not going to drag you through, all the different potential options. Like, here's where you're going. Here's what you're going to do. So senior year in a way was kind of a breeze, because it was like, okay, like I know what's happening after this. And so where again, like all my friends were, still working through the anxiety and the college searches and acceptances and stuff like that. But anyway, I graduate high school. I move out to GCU. I have a couple of really great years there. Throughout that time, because I knew what I wanted to do, I didn't waste time in looking for someone who would teach me how to do it. And so I told the Lord, hey, I want, even if it's my freshman year, like I would love to get an internship of some type with someone who will invest the time into me. And so I started asking around, like, hey, what are like the main churches that you hear about around here? I just want to, kind of figure out where a good place to start would be. And they gave me the names of two churches. One of them we kind of pursued a little bit, but it was a really big church. And so they, didn't necessarily need help or weren't looking for applicants at the time. But then the other church, we went and visited. And I actually emailed the worship pastor saying, like, not really wasting any time, just being like, hey, I'm a new student at GCU. I'm wanting to be a worship leader, and I'm looking for someone who will mentor me and kind of teach me how to do that. Would you do that? Anyway, I get no response from this guy for 3 weeks. Wow. So I'm feeling like a little discouraged. Yeah. But I like kind of kept up with him. Like he released a lot of music, and he had a website with CDs in the shop, and so I bought all of his albums just because I wanted to hear more of his heart and know his music. And anyway, get no reply on that either. And I actually get refunded for my order. Wow. Because he wasn't checking the shop or whatever. And so I just, okay, like, all right, Lord, maybe this isn't it. Maybe I'm knocking too hard on the wrong door. Right. But anyway, a couple weeks later, he finally responds, says, hey, I'm so sorry. Like things have been crazy here. But I would love to chat with you more about that internship. And so we meet, and I later find out that he had 6 other people at the exact same time email me about the exact same thing. And he said, the thing that stuck out about you to me is the fact that you as a young person who has access to Spotify and all the things, like went and actually bought my albums. Like there was something that stuck out about that. And not for like a profit or financial gain sense, but just there's something unique here. But anyway, he ended up taking me under his wing, became his, kind of associate worship leader pastor for about a year and a half. And then he actually does his now full-time ministry is, which I actually help assist with as well. It's called Likewise Worship, and it is an organization that exists to pour into worship pastors across the country, but also to serve churches that are in need. And he was actually doing some consulting for Calvary Church in Santa Ana, and they were looking for a new worship leader. And Southern California is kind of a place I always wanted to end up, but I thought, like, maybe I should work in Phoenix for a few years, pad my resume, maybe by late 20s, early 30s. And then Justin, my mentor, was like, hey, I'm consulting for this church, and I think you should go. And I was kind of mind blown. This church is 90 years old at this point. Wow. And so lots of heritage, lots of history. The last thing they're looking for is a 19-year-old worship pastor. But just the Lord has an amazing way of working things out. And so I guess led there a couple times, and interviewed, and the process, it just was so smooth and so God oriented and led. And so I've been there for the last 4.5 years. And in the process over the years, I've just been writing songs, recording music. It's been really cool to have a full-time job that kind of builds in an infrastructure for me to really pursue music and songwriting. And, in a way, it gives a natural platform to kind of test the waters on the music that I'm working on, in the sense of, hey, like, this worship song that I wrote, like, does it sing well? Does the church connect with it? It's kind of given me a natural backstop to kind of test out some of those things. And so, yeah, man, it's been a wild ride. But the Lord has been so faithful throughout all of it. And I'm really grateful to see, each step of the way, like from adolescence to now, like he was in every single, moment, it seems. So yeah, that's a very long version, but yeah, that's kind of what's led me here so far.
No, that's just a miraculous story. I mean, that's amazing. It's really, for me, it's key where you see God has placed himself in your life and in your family, your parents' life, in order to get you to where you are today. He's the greatest chess player, is what I tell people. And so he knows every move before we even know the moves, right? He knows our future. And just the fact that he's been able to guide you and speak to your parents in such a profound way in order to get you to where you are today. I mean, it's amazing. It's fantastic. So thank you for sharing that. I do think
absolutely.
It's a great story on just how God works through others, because even, when you were walking through those halls, and the fact that he was there at that specific time and was able to then, bring you into the office and talk to you about the program. That's God's work, right? He didn't have to be there at that time. He didn't have to be alone. There could have been somebody at the front desk who would have, blocked you from seeing him, but just God made the way. Right. The door was open and no one was in there but the right person, There's no one else other than God that can perform such miracles and do such things. So I think that's profound and fantastic. I'm interested so we've heard about your journey, interested to hear more about your music. What kind of songs do you listen to? Who are your favorite artists on the radio now or in the past? Are you more of an oldies music, Christian music guy, or more of the new age? I mean, what kind of music do you listen to?
Yeah, so I actually, my first introduction to music was a band called Striper. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but like 80s hair metal, like that was when that was super popular, and Striper was kind of this band that emerged out of nowhere and took the style and the image of hair glam metal and mashed it with a Christian message with lyrics. Okay. And it was phenomenal. It was kind of this thing that took the country and the world by storm, because here was this band that was performing a style of music that at the time by the stereotypical, church at large, was considered to be the devil's music. Electric guitars, like, poofy hair, like the tight leather pants. Like, it was just an image that seemed very secular. And it represented something very secular. But Striper was cool because they went into that scene rather than sticking to, and I'm a guy who myself ministers primarily to the body of Christ that already exists. So I don't say this to knock that. I believe that's important. But here was Striper kind of going onto the scene almost as musical missionaries to go into the thick of where some of this just really secular, anti-religious, environment and values were being preached. And they are just very in your face with gospel lyrics, and people loved it because, like, even if the message like wasn't something that their hearts aligned with, the music connected to them, which is why I love what you're doing, by the way, is you're talking about the value of music and Christian music and how it connects people to the Lord. And Stryper's just a key example of that, because they took a vehicle that connected with people outside of the church and made it one that could carry the Lord's anointing and glory, which I think is just so inspiring and so cool. And so all that to say, they were some of my very early influences. Just grew up, like I said, grew up playing along to songs on the drums. It was pretty much all Stryper songs. It was awesome. DC Talk is another one. Right. You know, the Toby Mac, Michael Tate, Kevin Max, like those grew up listening to those guys a lot. And beyond that, you know, my dad was a huge Beatles fan.
Nice.
And so kind of grew up with a few different styles and musical dialects in my repertoire. But I mean, these days, obviously, worship music is a huge influencer, a huge, you know, factor in my life. Jeremy Riddle is one of my primary influences, not just because of his songwriting and his worship leading, but just because his heart just bleeds and burns for people to experience the heart and the glory of the Lord. He actually released a book last year called The Reset, which I would highly recommend to really any worship leader or pastor for sure, but really any worshiper, anyone who wants to know the heart of worship, what it means to like get beyond the music and develop a heart for that. His book called The Reset is one that I can't recommend highly enough. It shaped, you know, in the last few months, it's just reshaped and realigned my heart to what my life should look like as a worshiper and a follower of Jesus, but what my role is as a worship leader, as a music minister, going into church settings, and really just kind of what is the all-encompassing picture of what my job is and what my God-given role is. And so he's been a major influence. You know, other guys like, you know, Matt Redman is obviously a huge voice in the worship music, been around for a long time. So greatly appreciative of those guys and everything. But yeah, from a music standpoint, I mean, I'll listen to pretty much anything. Right. But as far as my writing style, it's pretty, you know, focused and contained in the worship / CCM realm, I guess.
Nice. Well, speaking about your writing style, just tell us how you came up with, you know, you have two songs that are relatively new, Beauty in the Waiting and Come and Lift Your Eyes. Can you just talk about each of these songs a little bit? You know, what inspired you? How did you come up with the lyrics, that process? Because I have to mention some of the words used are profound. You know, I will let you describe to the audience, you know, it's mostly with Beauty in the Waiting. I found, you know, the lyrics there to be extremely profound and coming from probably a much deeper place that I would love for you to share with the audience and how you came up with those lyrics, because they are moving, and I think everybody on the planet should listen to the song. And it would just be nice to hear how you came up with those lyrics.
Yeah. Well, first of all, wow, man, thank you for saying that. That means a lot. As far as kind of the context and the backstory for these songs, I'll start with Come and Lift Your Eyes, even though that's the one that more recently came out. But Come and Lift Your Eyes was really, I feel like I have a lot of divine appointments with the Lord, but this was definitely one of them. I was on a houseboat trip with our college group in July of 2019. And some context here, my dad had just passed away in December of 2018, very, very suddenly, very out of nowhere. And so I'm still processing through and reckoning with that. And there's a lot of backstory behind that. And if we have time, we can get into that later. But there were just a lot of questions that I had for the Lord at that time, because none of it made sense. The way he died, the process that built up to that, it seemed all off the track from what the Lord had directed us in. But we had quiet times every morning on that trip. And I was reading Matthew 11, and starting in verse 28, it says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I remember that sticking out to me because in that context, in that verse, the Lord doesn't put any parameters or stipulations around what coming to him looks like. It doesn't say, "Come to me when you get your life figured out." It doesn't say, "Come to me when you've changed yourself." It doesn't say, "Come to me when your situation looks the way that you want it to." It says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Yeah. And that's where those first two lines of the song come from. It's just plucked directly out of that. And I think the rest of the song, Chris, honestly, just naturally flowed out because I felt those words, "come to me." Mm. I felt that as an invitation for just pouring out my soul to the Lord. And in a way, it was a two-way conversation. I was pouring out my heart to God, and then I feel like his response were the lyrics that transpired after that. Come, all you weary, come and rest, you who tire. Love has come to find you and meet you where you are. I feel like I cannot stress that message. And if that were if those four lines were the whole song, I feel like that's a huge theme that people have a hard time, and it takes years to process that theme. Yeah. Just stopping there. I'm still processing that of, you want to meet me where I am, God. That's strange, because I see the mess. I see the low points in my life. I see the thoughts that I have that are not so kind and not so pure. Yeah. But you want to meet me in that? That's profound, and that's so beautiful, and that's beyond my comprehension. And I believe that's the case for a lot of people and a lot of Christians who, I grew up in a great house, but I grew up in a very structured, this is the path, this is the way kind of house. And so the concept of straying from that, or that there's grace and just ebb and flow involved was very unique. My relationship with the Lord hadn't transpired that way throughout most of my life leading up to this point. And so from there, and then in the chorus, you've listened to it. It's gospel centered, a love that wore a price. He paid with sacrifice, and so out of that, come and lift your eyes because Jesus is the Lord. I just remembered very clearly, this is a song I have to preach to myself in this season. Where does my help come from? And I need a lot of it right now. And just in the bridge, it's just a very simple one-liner, but you are faithful to the end. And again, that's just a message that needed to be preached to myself, but then I believed it was one that is really applicable to anyone who listens to it right now. All of us, the last couple of years, have had our lives turned upside down, and still at times there still seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel with how things have transpired. But just that consistent reminder of he is faithful to the end, and that he doesn't ask us to come to him with any stipulations involved. He just says, "Hey, show up and let me do the work." And so I think that was something that was just really powerful for me in that season, because I was in a very distrusting place with the Lord. Again, with how things transpired with my dad, it involved me handing over my dad's life to the Lord and entrusting him with it. And then it felt like the Lord pulled the rug out from under him. And so I'm in a very cynical, distrusting place with God. Meanwhile, I'm leading worship in the church. I'm like still operating as a Christian, obviously, because it's what I know and it's what I believe. But it was a very tense, dysfunctional, at least on my end, it felt dysfunctional relationship with God at that time. And I felt like that was just a little bit of solace that he gave me, in the sense of, hey, here's a reminder. It's up to me. Yeah. It's not up to you. And where you sit right now is part of the process. It's part of the refining, as painful as it is. And that, I mean, is kind of a perfect transition point into Beauty in the Waiting. And that one was a little bit stranger for me, honestly. About, I would say in August, it was of this year, the Lord just gave me that title, Beauty in the Waiting. And I didn't know what it meant. But I remember very clearly him highlighting it for me, in the sense of, hey, I want you to sit with this phrase. I want you to chew on it a little bit, and we're gonna revisit this. And then, after probably about a week of sitting with that title, I just sat down, at my studio in this space here, just at my, keyboard, and I started playing some chords, and, those first, initial lyrics in the verse, just, I've lived 1,000 hours, I've lived 1,000 days, seen you in the sunshine, seen you in the rain. And in a way, the words felt honest because I've experienced that, but it also felt a little disconnected, because I would say at that point I wasn't in a season where I really wasn't having to really lean on those words at this point. Like it had been almost 3 years since Dad's passing. Like, obviously grief comes in waves, but I had kind of been able to move forward a little bit, and felt good about my relationship with the Lord, and felt like we were kind of in sync again and everything. So it felt a little like, okay, Lord, I'll write this. But I don't know how much of it's coming from my heart and how much of it is just because you want me to. And I was okay with that. But I wanted to be faithful, and to that title, and the Lord was very gracious and just abundant in his blessings, and he kind of laid out the rest of the lyrics for me. Right. And so I went with it. I recorded it. I did the song with a gal named Zoe, who is a phenomenal singer and vocalist. She leads for our worship team all the time. It felt like a great synchronization and fit for her vocal, and just for her life experience as well. I mean, that second verse, even though I was the one who penned them per se, I feel like the way that they were assigned activated something in her heart because of her past experiences and her current life situation. Like, she was able to sing that from her heart, and I'm sure that comes across in the recording for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. But anyway, we recorded it, we released it. Okay, good. And what I would come to realize is that this song was almost prophetically being handed to me, in more of a proactive sense of, hey, you need to release this because there is a storm coming. And I didn't know that at the time. But we're now, I think, 3 weeks removed from it at this point. But I learned in the first week of December, I had an old friend of mine from high school on November 30th take her own life. And that just rattled so many people in my community. Her and I had lost touch kind of in recent years, but I'm still connected to a really good friend of mine from that time who stayed connected with her and was best friends with her. And so the reality of the loss is super real. And I, obviously there's still emotions that are being processed with that. And then it's weird, man. there is some, and now I'm speaking in present tense, because there is some type of spiritual attack going on in the young adult, demographic of my community back home. Because so I flew back for the memorial, and then the day after that, I'm flying home back to SoCal, and I get word that another one of my classmates takes his own life. And then I learned yesterday that his brother did the same. And so it's just like, I'm in a season right now where this theme is just being compounded and heaped onto my lap of, even though they're people that I'm not primarily connected to anymore, it's people that, in my community, like, there's people that I care about who care about them. And even, based on varying levels of experience and friendship with them, like, I care about them too. And then just in the last 2 weeks, I've had conversations with people who have been either thinking about that or have attempted that. And so I just keep, like, getting this tossed in my lap. And so it's like, Lord, what do you want me to do with that? And then, I'm sharing this with my mom and stuff. And then in words of wisdom from her, I guess, or prophetic prompting, she sends me that second verse of Beauty in the Waiting. I've seen you work through failures. I've seen you heal mistakes. There's never been a past too broken that you cannot replace. I can't outrun your presence. I can't escape your grace. Within the ashes, I can see your face. And it just made me realize, like, okay, this song, was released, even though if it was one that my heart at the moment wasn't super connected to. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I love the song. Yeah. I love the way it turned out. I have such a deep just love and joy for how that turned out. But in the moment of writing it, I didn't really understand the end goal. It was like, okay, Lord, thank you for this song. It's wonderful. I love it. But do what you will with it, because you're the one that kind of inspired this. Yeah. And now I just see, like, wow, it was needed. It needed to be released so that it could be leaned upon for this season of life. And I've had several people who have either seen my recent posts or have heard or listened to the song when it first came out. Tell me, like, hey, this song is really. It's really getting me through all of the different things that I'm processing right now with, the deaths and everything else. And, like, I'm like, okay, Lord. Yeah. Okay. Like, you are good. Like, and it's interesting because, oftentimes we may not see the fruit of what the Lord asks us to do. He may, And I would just, if there's anything that I could have people walk away from this, interview or episode with, is that learn and continue to seek how the Lord speaks to you. It may be audible promptings like my mom. It might be something in your spirit that stirs, a thought that enters your mind that, is normal enough to where it doesn't sound crazy, but it's just abnormal enough to where you're like, I didn't think that. Like, that was from the Lord. Learn how he speaks to you and lean into that. Because while we may never see the fruits of it, like, you have no idea how the tide might change for somebody after you go and have a conversation with somebody because the Lord told you to, or, hey, like, you should pray for this person. Like, and when that happens, and I believe that, most of us as Christians, like, we get, thoughts and feelings and prompts put on our heart to pray for certain people at certain times. Like, tell those people, either ask them what you can be praying for, or just send them a long text with your prayer written out, or call them and pray for them on the spot. Because even if it seems weird in the moment, and even if you don't ever hear back from that moment, you have no idea what may have changed for them in that moment, just to know that somebody cared, to know that somebody was leaning into prayer and intercession on their behalf, because the Lord prompted you to. And so that's just a very, like, tangible example, I think, of something that and as I've said, like those examples are kind of abundant throughout my life, like throughout the college, stuff and everything and the job stuff. But something so simple as a song title. And I could have written that off as that's a cool, phrase, or that's a cool, combination of words. But it was a process, but the Lord really paved the way for me. And even though I didn't, all the way from initial concept to release of the song, had no idea what the purpose of this was. And now 2 months later, we're seeing, okay, like this is what it was all for. And so, that's kind of the backstory behind those two songs. Both of them each have a really special place in my heart, for the impact that they've had and for how the Lord's ministered to me through that. But
no, and I think it's very interesting how, you wrote a song based on a time in your life and, different circumstances that have happened in your life, but how that can relate to someone else in a different environment, going through something totally different. You talk about your song title, Beauty in the Waiting. When I listened to it and I saw the song title myself, I saw it from a different perspective based on my circumstances, and my journey and stuff I'm going through. I mean, as Christians, we all go through our ups and downs. The Bible says, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, which means you're going to go through some hard times. It's just going to happen. But you should fear no evil, for I am with you. So you're going through the tough times, but God is with you, but he's not saying that you'll never go through the valley. You will, 100% guaranteed. Right. You're going to have tough times. For me, Beauty in the Waiting, it was just all about, 2 words: trust God. That's it. I mean, as you listen to the lyrics, and I beg for everybody to please listen to the song over and over again. You talk about things like silver in the process, gold in the pain. You start thinking about, pain, gold is precious. What's this about? The fact is, it's a journey, right? And you just have to trust God will be at the end. There's many people, and there are even songs that say, I know how this story ends. The story ends with God. As long as you're faithful to him and you trust him, the story ends with him being prosperous and with him using your test as a testimony, because there's no testimony that comes without a test. It just doesn't happen. So just knowing that, that's the journey you have to go through, and the way this song breaks it down, I think is brilliant. And it definitely spoke to me in many ways than one, based on what I'm going through in my life. So I thank you for writing the song and for listening to God speak to you in developing the song and developing the words and the lyrics for the song, because it's really, really inspirational, and it gets you to trust God and to understand that he is there. It might not be in your time, but his time is actually better than yours. Now, one of the things you mentioned in your Instagram post, and I have to talk about this because I do think it was very telling of your heart and who you are. You were talking about, the loss of, your family and your friends, and also that we have to seek out people in our community and just reach out to them, because we don't know what tomorrow is. Tomorrow is not promised to anyone, but we can seek out to them and reach out to them and see if they need anything, or just to say a simple hello. We never know what kind of response that is. You said it super well, where you say, how are you, right? And you're always expecting someone to say fine. But if you say, how are you? And the person says, I'm not good, I plan on killing myself in the next 10 minutes. It's like, okay, you just never know. Right. You never know, but you have to seek out to people, because you could potentially prevent something from happening, and speak to them and bring them closer to God and let them find Christ in their hearts and potentially change something that might happen. Potentially, it's not a guarantee, but you could potentially change something that might happen. But we do have to reach out to our communities and speak to people a little bit more and get engaged. And maybe you want to talk about that, because I do feel you had a really interesting message there about reaching out to people, coming up with a list of people and reaching out to them. So if you don't mind talking about that, because it's much more closer to you because you've lost people in the past few months. If you don't mind talking about that, I think it'll be really great for people to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I said this in the post, but for those that haven't seen it, I just want to preface what I'm about to say with, I think one of the most harmful consequences that has transpired over the last couple of years with pandemic and everything else surrounding it, is that we've convinced ourselves that we are the arbiters of life and death. If we just work a little harder, if we commit to certain things a little bit more, if we just do all the right things, like we can stop people from dying. And I understand, I think, the heart behind those words and that idea, in the sense of we want to do things that don't hasten the process, particularly with COVID. I mean, that's a very prime example right there. There's certain things you can do, certain measures you can take to, prevent, certain things from happening, or at least make an attempt. But it's embedded this idea into our minds that the powers of life and death and how those transpire is in our hands. And I just simply want to remind us that's not true. The Lord knows each of our times, how long we have on this earth, when that comes to an end. He already knows what that looks like. And so, as an example, I mean, with my friend Laura, I think two things can be true at once. I think, one, that God's heart is so grieved and broken that she felt that the only way out and that the only way forward was to end her time here on earth. I believe he is grieved by that. I believe he does not celebrate that. And at the same time, I believe he wasn't surprised by it. And that's a concept that we as humans, I don't think, can grasp very easily, in the sense of, well, if God is so heartbroken and, moved by someone taking their own life, like, why would he, and he knows that's coming, why wouldn't he put a stop to it? And I think that's where the whole free will conversation comes in, and there's so many nuanced, complicated elements there that, obviously would be a totally different conversation. But all that to say, like, the Lord knows what's ahead for us. And so I don't want us to get trapped in this mindset of anyone who dies, anybody who commits suicide or takes their own life, like that's on us. Like, we didn't do enough. I don't want to preach that message. With that, though, I do think that scenarios like this beg of us a question of not what more could I have done, because I don't think that's healthy. I think that's more harmful, and it keeps us in a spot that's not good. But it prompts us a question of, what can I do differently going forward? I think Laura is a unique example of somebody who had no shortage of friends. Like, it was said several times at her memorial, like, if there was anybody who had the record for the most amount of best friends in her life, it was Laura. Because she was just a genuinely, deeply caring person for all the people that she met. And because of that, she became just a natural person that people would bring stuff to and entrust with. And yet still being surrounded by a great community, a family that loved her, things in her life that were, that had, good things to look forward to, that still wasn't enough to alleviate the darkness that surrounded her. And so I think she's a bit of an anomaly in that sense. But there are people that don't have that community, that don't have that friendship. And even if they are in a community, they don't feel seen and they don't feel known. And that, I do think, is on us a little bit. How are we as the church? And I say this as somebody who, I believe in the mission of the church. I believe in going out and, reaching the masses for Christ. I believe in, preaching to people who don't know Christ yet. But also, how are we taking care of our own flock? How are we taking measures to make sure that when people walk through our doors, whether they are literal doors of a church campus or metaphorical doors of people walking into our life, how do we make sure they feel seen? How do we make sure they feel cared for and loved, and that they don't feel this need, as we talked about earlier, to fix themselves or to put on a good face before they enter into serious, genuine relationship with us? I think my desire is to see the church at large get better at this. I think we're really good at a lot of things. I think the bigger we get, the worse we get at this particular thing. And I know we've got measures in place, life groups and all of that. There's so many different avenues and programs that try to alleviate some of that tension and complication. But the fact is, it shouldn't be on the pastors and the staff to come up with the right concoction of a program to make people feel genuinely loved by a community. This is where I think the church at large, meaning the entire congregation, has to get involved, in the sense of, obviously, I can't reach everybody. You can't reach everybody. Our senior pastor can't reach everybody. But each of us have different circles in which we operate that have several people in them that we can be making an effort to genuinely check in on them. And I think something that social media has done a pretty bang-up job of is preaching this idea that the most important thing that we could post about or, announce about is things going on in our own life or what we're doing. And I think it's important to share. Obviously, I am aware of the power and the pluses of social media, given, what I've been using it for recently. But it's preached this very narcissistic message and tendency that we've all kind of inherited a little bit. And that plays out in our own life, I think, to unhealthy ways where it takes us, it takes something like this. And I'm saying this to myself. I'm not preaching as somebody who has this figured out. I am ashamed, and I am heavily burdened by the fact that it took this scenario and then the ones that followed for me to start genuinely thinking about this. But how can we be more proactive in the sense of, hey, are we doing everything we possibly could to give people a reminder and a picture that there are people who love them and care about them and that will meet them where they are? I think one of the messages that I walk away with from Come and Lift Your Eyes is I want to show that same love that the Lord shows me. Come to me, period. I want to show that same efforts to my brothers and sisters, whether they know Christ or whether they don't. And I want them to feel like, hey, I will be a safe place for you. And out of that, my prayer is that they could see, okay, because obviously one person can't do it all. My goal is not to tell people, hey, become people's rock and, person that they lean upon for everything. Obviously, ultimately, that is the role of Christ. But the fact is, unfortunately, most people, particularly those who either did not grow up in the church or who did or have experienced church and have been hurt by it, their first tendency is not going to be, hey, I'm hurting, I'm in this really dark place, let me go to a church service. There's distrust there, there's lack of familiarity there. The easiest access that I think we can be for people to Jesus initially is just doing what he did and being amongst the people and actually getting into their messes with them and caring about where they are. I think Christ set an amazing model for that. And like to the point where the religious leaders around him were scoffing at him and were criticizing him like, hey, what are you doing hanging out with these degenerates?
With sinners, yeah.
And he's like, these are the people that need me.
Yeah, that's right.
And in fact, their hearts are even purer because they know they're in need.
That's right.
Whereas you have developed this mindset, hey, you've got it all figured out. You've got all the right answers. Right. But they see a genuine need. They see their brokenness. They see their depravity and need for a savior. Yeah. And I think we will more quickly convince people that, and not even have to do the logical argument, but I believe we will more quickly convince people that they are in need of something far bigger than themselves when we just show them what it looks like to be willing to love them where they are and say, hey, you don't have to have all this mess and this stuff figured out. Your mental health issues, your drug addiction, your, whatever it might be. I love you anyway. Yeah. And so how do we get better about doing that? And I think the first step in that is just on a daily basis, taking ourselves out of our own narcissistic world, because we all have that tendency to a certain degree, and saying, okay, how can I rechannel that energy into caring about the people around me? And I think, I'm blessed and privileged to work in a field, in a job, for an organization, being a church, that puts that at the forefront. People are not means to an end. People are the end. In a healthy, functioning church, and I'm grateful to be a part of one that allows me to do that in a full-time capacity. But my message for people is that you don't have to be a pastor to do this. You don't have to be in vocational ministry of any kind, whether that's music or pastoral or preaching or whatever. You don't have to be in one of those roles to do that. It can be, how are you caring for the person in the cubicle to your left and the cubicle on your right? How are you checking in on the baristas that you work with in the coffee shop? And it literally just starts with conversations and, simple things like I've been told several times by people, hey, one of the things I appreciate about you the most is just the fact that you look me in the eyes when I'm talking to you. Yeah. And like, you don't check your phone. Like when other people, one of the favorite compliments I've ever heard about a pastor at our church, his name is Matt Doan. Someone once, told me, they asked me, have you ever tried to get Matt Doan's attention when he's giving somebody else attention? Don't try it, because it's impossible. Because he is that invested. When he is with somebody, it doesn't matter for how long or their situation. Like, he's in that moment. He's looking them in the eyes. He's asking questions. He's responding. And a lot of that is a good place to start. Like, hey, when someone is pouring out their soul to you, like, look them in the eyes. And then when they're done, ask them questions. I think something that I have been fortunate enough to have a picture painted for, and to try to avoid a lot of the time, is when people are pouring out their heart to you, they don't want to be fixed. They don't want to be told they're wrong. They don't want to be told, hey, this is what, or sometimes even they don't want to hear, this is what the Bible or this is what God says about that. Like, those things are important, but I think timing and delivery is so important in these situations, because if you try to preach scripture at someone who is, buried in the depths of the darkest mess that they've ever been in, they might not receive that, and they might be turned off by that. And so I think it's so less complicated than we make it. Just be a friend, be a person that genuinely cares, that wants to know. And that's even something that at times, and I get it, because life is busy, life is hard, we all have struggles, but even just a simple prayer is like, Lord, give me a heart to love people where they are, and to see them, and to want to know more. And he's been so gracious and faithful in giving me that, even on my worst days. And I'm might not be able to tell, but I'm very introverted by nature. And so when I am like tapped out, I need to not be with people. I need to be isolated. I need to be by myself. Like, that's how I recharge. But even in those moments where I'm absolutely drained, but the Lord gives me a situation that very obviously calls for my attention, I say, okay, Lord, give me a heart for this person. Give me a heart for this situation. Give me the strength and the ability to be present with them in this moment. And he is so faithful, and he is so gracious to meet us there. He will fill in the gaps where we lack. And I think that's part of why people get discouraged in having those conversations, because they walk in feeling like they have to have all the answers, or that they have to have the fix, or that they have to be able to talk someone off the ledge. And like, that's not true. No. You just need, it's like the Lord says, just come to me, just show up, and I will do the work. That's what true dependency looks like. And I think that's what we were wired for. The Lord gave us gifts and passions and things that he's equipped us with, but in the end, he is the one that has to be driving the ship. He has to be the one who does the work, and it's why we give him the glory, and he's deserving of that glory, because it's by his power that things change.
Absolutely.
So
no, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. I do think, one of the misconceptions a lot of Christians have is when they're discipling or talking to others, that they have to have all the answers. And the answer is no one. I don't care if you've been preaching since you were 2 years old and you know the Bible inside and out, you do not have all the answers. No one has all the answers. But, as you're talking to someone, just asking God, in the back of your mind or in your inner voice, asking God, please lead me to say the right things and to do the right things. And to say the right thing might be to say nothing at all, and just to pray for them, with them or without them, as long as you know who they are, you know their name, and you pray with the intent. God knows exactly what they need, exactly what needs to happen, and God will take care of it. But we don't have to have all the answers. And I've even found that, even just telling people, the reason why I'm drawn to Christian music a lot is I find a lot of answers in Christian music. I find a lot of guidance in Christian music also. Just even recommending a song that somebody listened to could be amazing, could be a life changer for them, because so many songs have so many amazing messages that you might not be able to get in a 1 hour sermon, all packed into 3.5 minutes, So I've also found Christian music to be a way to disciple and preach to people, and just saying, hey, you know what, based on your circumstance, I think you should listen to this song. 3.5 minutes of your time. And one thing about listening to Christian music is, when it's like when the praises go up, the blessings come down. When you start listening to it and it's repeating in your brain and it's going over and over again, you're beginning to build faith, confidence, trust in God. You can't help it. It builds itself. I don't care who you are, how dead set you are on your mood. Christian music will change you, and it will change your attitude. There's no way. I mean, the devil cannot keep that door closed. That door will open because you're praising the Almighty, living God. The ruler of it all. And when you're praising Him and talking to Him, it shatters everything. So I've also found, I hear you and everything, but I've also found that just recommending Christian music and Christian songs based on scenarios is a fantastic thing to do. And, it's just, they can listen to it in their own time, in their own car, quietly, peacefully, on their own. And, God speaks through God speaks through song in a very, very interesting way. So, just not trying to promote Christian music more than I am already. I mean, this podcast is about Christian music, but I have found that to be really interesting.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else you'd like to share? I'd like to find out take this to a lighter moment. Anyone who watches you on stage, one of the things they'll notice, which is one of the things I noticed, is number one, and I didn't mention this to you before, when you're on the drums, dude, you just go crazy. What the heck?
Yeah, man. No, it's where I started, man. And I honestly, like, for years, that's all I did. I wasn't this, I guess, typical prodigy musician where, like, all these things just started manifesting at once. Like, my bread and butter for the first probably 9-10 years of my life was drums. And, from there, instruments slowly started building in and everything like that. But yeah, man, that's where I started. It takes me back to childhood in a way, but it also just allows me to express so free. Like I love leading, vocally and with a guitar, but there is a certain amount of responsibility and reverence you have to carry with that. It's not just about what you're singing, but it's about, how you're leading people, how you're speaking, you're feeling the tone of the room. And so there's a lot that goes into that. And drumming is, while there is still that responsibility of, like, you're leading people into worship, like there's just a slightly more sense of freedom about it in a way. That's why, and for any worship pastor or leader out there that's in charge of running a team, if there's one thing I could say to you, it's get your team on a rotation of leaders so that it's not always you. One, I think it's healthy for churches to hear from different voices, because that keeps them from getting attached to certain people. You see all the time in churches, like, part of the reason why they have such hard time with change is because you have set up a picture for them that things are going to be consistent all the time. And I think there's a healthiness to consistency in a way, but also with that comes emotional attachment. And my heart has always been, and my mentor Justin, he has embedded this into me from day one, is, hey, make yourself replaceable. And it's good for the church to see that, but also it's good for you to be reminded, hey, like, at any time, like, from a practical standpoint of, speaking very bluntly, like, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, the church would carry on. But also in the sense of, the Lord has chosen me to do this work through me for a time such as this. But at any point, his kingdom could go on without me. And I think that's just a healthy mindset for us all to stay in, is that, hey, none of us are above being replaced. None of us are above taking a back seat. It's just healthy. And just, like, from a very practical team building standpoint, giving your other leaders chances to rise up and take the reins is so beneficial. Yes, there's good things about internships and shadowing and co-leadership, but, like, there is nothing that grew me up faster as a leader than on week 2 of me working at the church in Phoenix. Justin was like, okay, I'm out of town. You're it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 18 at that time, like, hadn't ever led an adult worship service before, had only led for some youth stuff, but, like, he's just like, okay, it's all you. It went okay, didn't go great, but you learn so fast is by making your own mistakes, in my experience. Absolutely. And my message to worship leaders would be, your teammates cannot make their own mistakes if you won't, kindly speaking, get yourself out of the way and allow them to do that. And so I say all that to put in context, I have the opportunity to either drum or be off the platform, pretty consistently, because we have just set that model from the beginning of, hey, yes, I am the, I guess you would call, primary worship pastor of our church. But we've got 2 other part-time worship pastors, and then we've got just an incredible team of volunteer leaders who carry an anointing that our church needs to be exposed to. They carry such a higher calling than being, a background vocalist, which, no hate for backing vocalists. They serve a role, they play a part. But there needs to be room for that talent and that gifting to rise up. And I've found the most effective way to allow that to happen is to just have some mornings where I am not at the forefront. And so what you probably saw on that video I posted yesterday, like, I had the opportunity to drum, and like you'll notice kind of in the congregation, like the spirit of worship is just as high, it's just as prevalent. And that's taken a while to get there. Because for a long time before I came, people were pretty reliant on, their pastor to be the speaker and like the worship leader that they like to be on the platform. And like, we've completely broken that off to where it doesn't matter who's on the stage, who's in front, who's singing, who's doing what. Our church just knows, okay, that's part of our culture, is we just have a lot of people who, all have gifts, and they take turns, being put on display. And so, but yeah, all that to say, I love drumming. I love what it does for my soul. It allows me to, and this only happened because we gave people opportunity to like make mistakes, and because it wasn't always like that. Like, even some mornings where I drum, like I'm pretty vocal about the direction of things, but like, we're at a point now where I can just drum, I can, worship freely, and knowing and trusting that I've got leaders at the forefront of the platform who are doing all of the, more, I guess, spiritual check-ins and responsibility, and like, listening for promptings from the Lord and everything. And even though I still get those when I'm in like, a drumming spot or whatever, like, I try to turn full authority over to the people who are designated to lead that day, because I want them making the calls. I want them learning how to do, all the things that I've been able to learn how to do. Yeah. And so it's really about, for me, it's been just about replicating the opportunity that was afforded to me, because a leader was humble enough to not need to be the guy all the time. And but yeah, drumming is fun.
Yeah. But so in the business setting, it's really called a rotational. So when you move from one department to another department to another department, it happens with many internships in the corporate world. And corporations have found this to be just spectacular for them, because you're teaching that intern or that, group head about all the other departments, so they can potentially find something that they might excel in, because they might be in one department and not know that, hey, if I move to department C or department G, I might actually excel there more and do better there. So they're able to, pretty much get their feet wet in different departments and organizations in the business. And what that's doing, and what you're doing, is you're just planting that seed. Because if they weren't able to have someone that could give up the reins for them to, express themselves and see how they do in a leadership form or in a different department, they wouldn't know if they would like it or not. And who knows what seed might be planted in their lives and germinate far in the future, because of that one move, and because they were given that opportunity. So I do think, it's interesting that you playing the drums and doing other things and allowing people to move around in your department. You really truly never know, what God might have them do in the future, or how that might make a change to their future because of this, gesture, and your ability to just, let them do what they can, and let them fail, honestly speaking, because failure is the key to success. Yeah. So And the second thing I want to talk about was your guitar strap. So, what is up with that? Because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, man. There's not a huge story behind it. I love Baymax from the movie is Big Hero 6. But I don't know. He's just a funny, cool looking guy. I don't know. I think it reminds me of home a little bit just because, Dad was, just a big burly, like, teddy bear at heart. And I think like that it's partially like, entertainment. Like I like how his character is in the movie, but also just it is like a little piece of home for me in a way. And I actually haven't shared that part of it with anybody. Like people just like ask about like, oh, that's a cool strap. I'm like, oh yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, I think there's like just a little bit of it's like a little bit emotionally attached in that way. But yeah, no, it's mostly for fun.
Oh, that's cool. Is that your dad in Beauty and the Waiting? In the video?
Yeah. So there's a section near the beginning of the video where it's me as a kid, and I think he's holding me, and we're like going down a slide or something. And I think so that's just some old taped footage.
That's fantastic.
So.
And I can see where you get that comparison, because he's definitely a bigger guy, but he's
not a small man for sure.
But has a heart of gold, and that's what Baymax was basically.
Definitely.
Nice. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And if I may, I saw one of your questions that you kind of asked me to ponder through, and it was one of them that I found interesting was. I think it said something to the effect of, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be? And I have two, I think. The first one is to just have grace for yourself. I think, again, just as I said about my background, it was very healthy, it was very good, but it was very rigid in a way of just, hey, this is the path. You stay on it, and, when you get off course, we will push you back on it, and use whatever force is necessary to get you there. And so while I think that was healthy for me to kind of build that foundation early, I think it turned into this thing of, okay, when I make mistakes, my natural tendency is to distance myself from the Lord. Because in a way, it's like, Lord, if I'm in a mess, it's like, I know I'm in the wrong. I don't need the lecture. Like, I know all the answers. So I'll check back in when I'm good, when I'm kind of back in the lane. And first of all, as we've talked so much in this conversation already, that's not the Lord's heart. The Lord says, come as you are, and we will figure it out. And I will transform you. And I think that plays into having grace for yourself, because we need to more and more and more every single day preach to ourselves and remind ourselves that we are not the ones who will change us. If we could do that, if we had the power to do that, then we would not have needed Jesus to cover our sins, to save the world. Like, that would be totally irrelevant if we had the power to change ourselves. And so I think constantly reminding us, not out of a, masochistic, super depressive, like I am worthless type way, but like rather because I know I am broken, because I know I am in need of a savior, I can have this grace for myself because I know he will change me. It's a process. There's beauty in the waiting. There is a beautiful thing about learning to wait on the Lord, but also to allow him to walk with you and to do the changing, because that will reinforce that theme of faithfulness to you, where you see, okay, even in my lowest moment, he was still walking with me. In my highest moment, he was celebrating with me. Like, I think we see God as this stoic person sometimes, and like, he celebrates with us when things are great. He mourns with us when things are bad, like, and everything in between. He's a God who knows what we've been through. It's that verse, we don't have a high priest who doesn't empathize, but he empathizes because he's been through all of this and more. And so I think that's so important to remember is your walk with the Lord will progress so much faster if you just will accept the fact that it's not up to you. Your job is to show up. Your job is to commit to spending time with the Lord, and He will carry you. He will do the rest. That's the type of God that we serve. That's the power that He wields, and it's amazing. And the second thing I think I would share as just a caution is to not look at things in life through such a black and white lens. I think throughout my life, because I grew up with foundational truths being preached to me, I think there were certain pretexts and things that came along with that shaped my view of people and what my role is in their life. And the more that I live and the more that, the more people I come in contact with, I just am constantly reminded that everyone's situation and scenario is different. The Lord has shown up in their life in all sorts and kinds of ways, and he's constantly doing a new thing. But I think myself for sure, but also the church, I think we've trapped ourselves a little bit, and we have lost opportunities to reach people because we are so tightly clinging to non-essential things. And I won't dive into specifics on what I think those things are for the sake of avoiding controversy for now. But aside from, the foundational beliefs of our faith, Jesus is Lord. He is, no one comes to the Father except through Him. While I know that there are other things that we preach that are important and good and even correct, I think we sometimes die on hills at times where that's not the most important priority. As we've talked about earlier with just some of the caring for people stuff, I think before we start forcing certain pretexts and topics on people when they're not in a place to receive that, whether it's because they're in a dark time or because they don't even believe the same things we do. I think leading first with love and also just a mind and a heart that is willing to live in the tension that is the gray in between the black and white. Because most situations are that way. And I think sometimes the church has come off as not understanding or not loving because we don't know how to live in the gray. Yeah. We have certain standards and principles that we hold to, which I believe are important and good. But we cut off relationship when we don't know how to put those on hold for a second to intercede on someone's behalf and to really meet them where they are and to eventually lead them to a place where they can accept these principles. But that's the thing, is it's not our job to convince them. Our job is to love them. Our job is to present this amazing truth to them that there is a God who made everything, that wants to sit in their mess with them, that wants to be with them, and that He will change their heart. He will shape their heart to start accepting these truths, these principles. It's not our job it's our job to diligently preach them and to not hide from them. But this idea that, if we budge on this, then all hope is lost.
Yeah.
Like, no, the Lord is much more powerful than that. And as we continue to point people to Him through, the greatest commandment, which is love, I think we will see a lot more fruit. And so, that's just some final thoughts. For
I agree. Thank you for sharing that. I totally agree. I mean, Jesus came for sinners. I mean, it's that simple.
Amen.
If we, as Christ followers or Christians, do not talk or bring in the sinners or reach out to them where they are, then we're not being Christ-like. It's that simple, If you can't love them for who they are, where they are at that particular moment, dude, you're not being Christ-like. It's that simple. So you need to go to them where they are and preach to them and pray on them, and ask God to find them and pull them into His world. And by the grace of God, they open their hearts to Christ. But that's God's job to work on them, and it's your job to just tell them about Christ whenever appropriate, and pray for them. I think praying for people is underestimated in many ways, because prayers can move mountains. The Bible talks about, if you have faith as tiny as a mustard seed, and you say to this mountain, ye be moved, it shall move. That faith comes in prayer, and that, you pray in, and then, God does the rest. It's all about, planting a seed and letting that seed germinate. So I totally agree with everything
Absolutely.
you said, Joshua. And thank you so much for being part of this. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, so I do appreciate it. And I hope everyone who hears this is able to get something from it, and change. I know we were really talking about your two songs and how that came to being, but I think people should also understand how you've come to the songs and how death has played a role in this, and how they could potentially see things a little bit different, and reach out to people and talk to people more. I really hope they are able to see that as part, or hear that as part of this message.
Yeah. Thank you, brother, for sharing your platform with me. I appreciate you showing interest and curiosity with some of these things. And yeah, my prayer is that above all, people would be drawn closer to the Lord through this conversation, but even beyond that, that they would be charged or inspired, maybe is the word, to do something with that. My hope is that this isn't just oh yeah, that was a cool thing that I listened to, and then move on. Like, I'm hoping that this sparks some action, particularly on the stuff that we talked about, just with caring for people and so forth. So yeah, thanks, man.
Cool. Thank you very much. So with that, we'll end this.